The historical events in the novel are real, but in terms of the characters and what happens to them, how much of the story is from your cousin and how much is from your imagination?
Most of it is my imagination. Fosca inspired the main character, Rosa, and she told me a few stories about being trapped in the farmhouse, but everything else is made up, except for that tragic event in a nearby village at the end. That is historically accurate, and I did a lot of research about that.
Could you describe the main character of the book, Rosa?
Rosa, well, wasn't actually inspired by Fosca, and every time I wrote about Rosa, I thought of Fosca, and I had her picture in mind. And she's a short, feisty woman who you would expect to confront the Nazis, as she did. She told me this one story about how she was making ravioli and rolling it out, and some German soldiers came because they thought that she was hiding a army deserter in the attic, and actually she was. But she had hid him so well that they didn't find him. But they kept asking her questions and asking her questions, and and I can just see her, confronting these people, as short and feisty as she is, and telling them, get out of here. And that's what they did finally.
Wow. A major theme of the book is forgiveness, also the sense of community and family that arises through shared suffering. Were those parts of the story that came from your cousin, or was that something you created?
I think part of the community aspect was because she talked about how some people didn't get along. There was an aunt who was sort of also feisty, and she sort of created some friction among the people. So it was that kind of story that I wanted. I wanted the story to be one of how people form a community when they are under siege, when everything else is terrible around them. They have to band together, and somehow they survive because they do. And that's a concept that I don't understand. I've never been in that kind of situation, but it's an interesting one, and I think it's true that people do that. And you look at other terrible tragedies that have occurred, and people, a family or neighbors, all get together and they somehow survive.
And that comes through in the book. One of the things that impressed me about the book was that it's very ambitious. A central theme is the problem of evil. Can an all-good and all-powerful God be reconciled with the existence of absolutely horrific evil here on Earth? And you confront that issue head-on. Did you find it difficult to do that, to present it to readers?
Yes, that was very difficult because nobody understands, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? I mean, that has been a moral question for forever, and I don't know that anybody has the answer. And I had to do research about that and try to find a concept that would try to explain that. And the final answer, I guess, is we don't know why, and it happens, and we have to accept it. But those things do happen, and they happen a lot, in war, and not just in war, but people get sick, and terrible things happen.
How much research did you need to do to write the book?
A ton. I didn't know anything about World War II. My brothers were in World War II, but I was much younger, so I didn't know. I was 10 years old when the war ended in 1945. So I didn't know anything about the war, except what I'd read, and I certainly didn't know much about the Italian experience, which has not been written about a lot. So I had to do a lot of research. I actually purchased 55 books that are on my shelf, and besides the ones that I got from the library and the ones that I had earlier. So I had to read a lot about Italy. I had to read a lot about the war in Italy. I had to read a lot about the resistance movement, because the resistance movement is a major part of the conflict here, because at this point during World War II, as I said, the Germans weren't in Tuscany yet, but the resistance movement was gaining strength a lot during late summer of 1944, which is when the period of the book is set. And so I had to read about the resistance movement. Then I had to read a lot about the SS and the Nazis and the whole war plan that the Nazis had to move south, and then how they retreated. So a lot of this isn't actually in the book, but I had to understand what it was all about to accomplish the setting for this. So the research, as you said, I'm a journalist, and I worked at the Milwaukee Journal for a long time. So I approached this as a journalist, and so I did a lot of reading, and it was like reporting. And then I went back to Italy twice to do interviews. Actually, I had originally planned to write this as a nonfiction book, but that I quickly realized was impossible, because for one thing, I don't know the Italian very well, and I don't read it at all. I didn't have the time to spend over there because I teach at Marquette, and so I'd only have the summers, and that wouldn't have been enough. I didn't think I would be able to find enough people who would remember it, because this was 60 years ago or more, and I couldn't read documents. So that's why I turned to fiction writing rather than attempting it as nonfiction. But I tried to use the same kind of techniques that a journalist would use, which is do a lot of research, find out what the subject is about, then find out what the story is about, and get as much detail as you can, and try to understand the characters as much as you can. So that's basically how I did it.
There are some wonderful details in the book. The setting becomes a character. The farmhouse is a character. Mm-hmm. And it's a very authentic Italian book. Have you had a lot of positive response in that regard? I
have. A lot of people have said that they could see the village, they could see the farmhouse. The farmhouse is called the Cielo, which is the title of the book, and that's why and it literally means heaven or sky, and so that's that it is the farmhouse, and I wanted the farmhouse to be a character in the book. I'm glad you noticed that. But the other detail I think I got just from visiting the place, the countryside, a lot, and I actually I went over there specifically during August because I wanted to get the color, the light, the flowers, the trees, to understand what the atmosphere was like at that time of the year, the same time of the year that the story is set, though obviously 60 years earlier.
When you started writing, did you have an overall sense of the structure of the book?
I knew where the story was going to end, and this is my first novel, so I wasn't quite sure what I was doing. But I knew there was a story there. As a journalist, I knew there was a story. So I knew where the story was going to end. I knew some of the main points of what was going to happen along the way. But then it seemed to me that the characters took over the story. And for a lot of things, a lot of times, I just felt like they were talking in my head, and I was just writing down what they were saying and what they were doing and how they were reacting, and that led to the next scene and the next scene and the next scene, and it developed from there. And of course I was directing it toward the scene, the climax and the end of the book, but a lot of times I didn't feel like I had control of this, that they were in control.